You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello everyone, you are listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm your host Robin, and I'm here with our third and final episode on Black Norwegian death metal. I don't know how many of you ended up watching Lords of Chaos or Until the Light Takes Us, but it's a fascinating topic for a variety of reasons. You don't even have to be into the scene, into the music. It's just absolutely insane. Church burnings, murder, Satanism. I mean, it was a very, very, very busy couple of years. So we have finally reached the end, at least of the story of Burzum's Varg Vikerness, as well as Mayhem and Euronymous. So for this episode, we're going to cover Varg Vikerness, who, as you'll be able to see from this episode, is quite an interestingly vile person. So before we get into that, let's just get some quick housekeeping out of the way. You're listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm Robin. Thank you for being so patient on my break, guys. Unfortunately, I had a very close loss about a week and a half ago, and I have been unable to record. A lot has gone on over the last couple years. Thank you for the kind words for those of you who know. That being said, don't forget to check out our website, WeSawTheDevil.com. From there, you can find us across all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, as well as our Patreon. As always, if you're liking the content, want to support the show, please take 20 seconds out of your day to leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you're currently listening to this on, because it means the absolute world to us, and then also has a lot to do with back-end administrative things like sponsorships and so forth. Just a heads up, as there was an unexpected absence, this is the final episode of the Black Metal series. Guys, there's so much news to talk about, so you're going to have multiple episodes this week. I have a lot that I even want to talk about. So the next episode is going to probably be coming on Wednesday, and we need to discuss what we know about the Liza Fletcher case. But most importantly, there has been some big movement in the Lori Vallow case. Some that's actually pretty surprising. We have the Colby drama. Melanie is apparently in legal trouble now. We have quite a bit to discuss there. So the next episode is going to be primarily a Vallow episode with some other news headlines and updates as well. But let's go ahead and get into black metal. Oh, but first, I've received a handful of emails from listeners asking me if I myself, why I'm interested in black metal. Do I listen to it? The answer is yes and no. I listen to probably one band that would maybe be considered post-black hardcore metal. It's kind of its own genre. But if you are interested in hearing the music that I like, there's a band called Oathbreaker. It's female fronted, amazing vocalist, but the song Immortals by the band Oathbreaker is in my top 10 favorite songs of all time. You know those songs that just really catch you by your soul, and for some reason, it doesn't matter if it's a happy song, a sad song, whatever, you just cry, tears are shed just because you're so moved. Immortals by the band Oathbreaker is actually that song for me. They are considered, kind of black metal-y, but you can listen to it if you're interested and see. But that is the only band. I'm not a fan of the vocals. I'm not typically a fan of the guitar style of black metal. I think the corpse paint face, it just makes me think of ICP. I'm not a juggalette. Not my scene. Just not interested. So overall, no. I am not into Norwegian black metal at all. However, in the immortal words of Marie Kondo, I love mess. I haven't even actually scratched the surface of all the drama, murders, crimes, torture, crazy stuff that has happened in the metal scene. But yeah, I love mess, and Norwegian black metal provides that in spades. So that's all I have to say about that. To recap the last episode, I covered the murder of Euronymous by his bandmate Varg Vikerness, and then the resulting 21-year prison sentence after unsuccessfully calling the murder self-defense. If you recall, Varg Vikerness said, well, I thought he was going to kill me, so I basically went there to strike first, and then he kind of caught himself and said, well, I didn't mean to kill him. He decided to kill me when I showed up. I mean, it was just all very obvious that he went to murder that man. I also discussed the murder of Magna Andreessen by Emperor, a different band, their member Faust, as well as the burning of the stave churches. Now, for this episode, again, I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into who Varg Vikerness is, because it is just good old Uncle Varg. In the metal community, Varg Vikerness is a bit of a joke. Burzum, you have a lot of diehard fans. Burzum as a band is very experimental. It was very weird. Again, it was just Varg Vikerness, playing all of the instruments himself and creating this just something that a lot of people hadn't heard before. So he kind of got a bit of a fan base there. But after the murder and all this craziness, and he spent time in prison, he's kind of become known as a joke. And in this episode, you'll learn why, but a lot of people call him Uncle Varg. And that's not actually a term of endearment. That's kind of like, you crazy old bastard. So yeah, good old Uncle Varg. That being said, if you remember from the previous episodes, Varg had a history of hanging out with neo-Nazis as a teenager before he even ever got involved with music. His parents were nationalists, so honestly, that isn't too terribly surprising, right? After he joined the band Mayhem, part of his frustration and anger stemmed from the fact that the people in the scene just weren't terribly interested in his politics. Let's just be completely honest here. Much like the American hair bands of the 1980s, Norwegian death metal was much the same. It was a bunch of teenage or early 20s boys, hyped up on testosterone, horny, and basically looking to shock and push boundaries. I mean, the aesthetics couldn't be more opposite, but they're very much kindred spirits in that way. Except Varg didn't seemingly have an interest in any of that. His passion was solely directed at hating people of color, Jews in particular, and anyone he deemed a threat to his Norwegian heritage. His bandmate and peers, by and large, just wanted to have a good time. They thought it was fun. Varg wanted to make a difference to what he believed to be true. His bandmates just wanted to drink, party, have a good time, and maybe make some old people uncomfortable. So after Varg went on trial, he was found guilty. He immediately began to serve his 21-year prison sentence. Did he take this time to peacefully reflect on the choices that put him there? Did he feel remorse for taking the life of one of his best friends? No and no. Instead, disgusted by the media's sensationalist view surrounding the case, he decided to write a book. And in 1996, Vargsmal, translation, Varg's speech, was released onto the internet. And it really just is a written fecal fiesta. I mean, I am dead serious. It's like he just Nazi diarrheaed all over a typewriter and decided to post it. So let's check out some excerpts from the book. Bear with me, it's a pretty long passage, but I really want you guys to get a feel for who Varg Vikerness is. This is a chapter of the book called Foreign. He writes, quote, "I am literally blue-eyed. My eyes are blue and I'm honest. Had the newspaper said directly that they wish to obliterate our race and wash all the good blood and the Germanic Paki blood and other dirty blood, would you have taken it seriously? No. The Jews know their message is entirely unacceptable and they must camouflage it. They've always known this and are therefore doomed. They must be superior above all others when they can get Germans with clean blood to fight for their own race's erasure. This is also the reason that there are so many Jews that study psychology, so they can acquire knowledge about mankind's feeble points, which these Jews can then exploit to fight to crush all others, and finally join sides in dreams of eternal paradise. If they find a weak point on you, you're finished. It is something that you'll never see with others than German racists. There are no other people that are honorable other than the Germans. All others are methodically false. We are a blue-eyed, honorable people. In the South, they lie about everything. They always cheat when they get a chance and scheme when they can. How do I know this? I haven't been schemed, but I know many of these people. A great number of Italians, Greeks, Portuguese, and Spaniards. And I certainly know some that have experienced various things while in the South on vacation. Of the Norwegians, in prison it's a large number that have Southern European blood in them. I lived in Iraq for 1 year and been in Syria, Lebanon, and in prison. For those who don't know, I can say that it's full of foreign cultured people in the Norwegian prison. about 40% on the average. One section in Oslo, there was 80% who were black foreigners, 10% white foreigners, and 10% Norwegians. Luckily, after some time, they understood that I was Norwegian. The one guard that came from Sarpsborg stayed by the opening since he had found a Norwegian had come, so he could finally have an intelligent conversation. I have not found a difference between the colored foreigners I met in the free world with the ones in prison. They are all crooks, with no exception. End quote. I mean, I think his language is pretty self-explanatory here. You get the picture. He is a complete nationalist. Every other race is bad. The Jews are nefariously in control of everything and want to wipe every other race off the map. It's the same tired, far-right, nationalist, wannabe Hitler bullshit that we've heard from countless other people. And as I'm sure you're aware, neo-Nazis and far-right nationalist groups are also in Norway. Heavily so, actually. Varg Vikerness was running in a lot of those circles when he was a teenager. Instead of the Satanism that so many involved in the Norwegian black metal scene subscribed to, he actually pushed away from that in favor of Germanic paganism and nationalist ideals. The Norwegian Heathen Front was an established hate group by the time Varg went to prison. After he got to prison and then published his book in 1994, it actually aligned pretty closely with the NHF. Swedish scholar and author Matthias Gardell wrote in his 2003 book titled Gods of the Blood that Vikerness founded the Heathen Front and advocated, quote, National Socialism, Anti-Semitism, eugenics, and racist paganism. The Encyclopedia of White Power said that Vikerness was a, quote, self-proclaimed leader of the Norwegian Heathen Front, and the historian Nicholas Goodrick Clark said that Vikerness underlined his role by writing Varg's Maul, that he formulated his heathen ideology using material from Norse mythology combined with occult National Socialism. In April of 1997, Norwegian police actually arrested 5 neo-Nazis who were planning assassinations of various political leaders. Not only that, but they were also planning to break Varg out of jail. Varg's own mother, Lene Bohr, was also arrested because she gave the paramilitary group 100,000 kroner. That's about $9,700 US. Now, Lene admitted to giving them money, but said that she had no idea who they were. But she did know them. Apparently, Varg told her that his life was in danger and that they had plans to help protect him. Eventually, though, charges against everyone involved were dropped, so nothing came of that whatsoever. 5 neo-Nazis were planning assassinations of political leaders, also planning to break Varg out of jail. A bunch of them were arrested with guns, and Varg's own mother sent them almost $10,000. But yeah, nobody got charged. Varg may have gone into prison this long-haired, baby-faced musician, but while he was in there, his look changed. And again, I highly suggest, even if you don't give a crap about the music, to look up the video of Varg receiving his prison sentence. It's considered one of the most iconic moments in all of music, because he is given a 21-year prison sentence for murdering his friend, his bandmate, and he just gives the creepiest smile. It's really unsettling. And now, that we're in 2022 and we have all of this additional context and history from him, all kind of makes sense. But yeah, he went in and he came out with a different look. In a couple rare photographs that you can find online, Varg adopted a total neo-Nazi fascist skinhead type look. He quite literally had the Adolf Hitler haircut with a comb over. It was also said that he had a belt buckle with SS insignia on it. When he would make court appearances, he would have, the button-up shirts that were a little bit bigger that a lot of the neo-Nazis wore. I mean, he had a total look. But more so, Varg no longer making music while incarcerated, that's kind of a given to most of us, right? But it's not the case. He actually asked prison officials for a guitar and they politely declined. I mean, I can't imagine they would want to give a guitar, an instrument, to a man who is convicted of murdering his best friend. That's six strings there that can be taken out and used to strangle people to death. So no, Varg, not going to happen. However, they did actually grant him usage of a synthesizer, like of a keyboard with effects. And Varg actually went on to release 2 dark ambient albums while he was in prison. So between 2 new albums and 2 compilation albums, music was still being released under the name Burzum. And far-right groups would end up selling the albums online, including copies of Vargsmal, his book. By 1999, Heathen Front's actual website was selling Vargsmal. In 2001, the AHF claimed that it had chapters in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, the United States, Canada, Russia, and Flanders. But between 2001 and 2003, Varg's situation was largely the same. He was offered a job in the prison, but he refused to take it. He said that he didn't believe in prison labor. So that meant that he spent 23 out of 24 hours in his cell. He would go on to write extensively about the isolation, and we'll touch on that momentarily. Everything escalated when on October 26, 2003, Varg Vikerness failed to return back to his Vestfold, Norway prison after a short leave. Many Scandinavian prisons, unlike those here in America, allow some prisoners the ability to, say, visit family or even work during periods of the day. And Varg was on such a day trip. But he didn't return. He was supposed to be back by midnight, and he did not go back. So around 4:30 p.m. the next day, a call came into police. A family of 3 was driving through Numedal when they were flagged down by a pedestrian. Thinking that the pedestrian may be hurt or need assistance, they pulled over and were immediately met with a pistol-toting Varg. Varg had a handgun. He forced the family out of their gray Volvo station wagon and then took off in it, just left them there on the side of the road. Apparently, he immediately had a plan. It was a cabin off the grid, so he traveled there and then came back into the city about 18 hours later, around midnight. A patrol car spotted it and then called in for backup. It took about 5 police cars and a barrier maneuver to stop it. Varg was taken back into custody without further incident. And then, of course, Varg's mother, ever the apologist, quickly began releasing statements to the media. She claimed that Varg had written her a letter and left it for her on a previous visit. Supposedly, he said that his life was in danger and that another inmate had actually attempted to strangle him to death. He feared for his life and thought that there would be another attempt. Quote, "Mother, I will flee," end quote. He supposedly wrote in this letter. Helen would go on to say in an interview, quote, "When I read in his letter that his life had been threatened, I had a better understanding of why he made the choice of trying to flee. He couldn't tell the prison staff about the threats because he was afraid they put him back in a locked cell, but he feared the threats." Varg was certainly armed for threats during his escape. Police found a gas mask, camouflage, GPS, a cell phone, maps, and a laptop in the car, as well as a handgun, an automatic rifle, and 700 rounds of ammunition in the small cabin in which he had been hiding. He ended up being charged with auto theft, breaking and entering, and for the possession of 2 firearms. But because Norway's maximum prison sentence is 21 years, there was no additional jail time added on to his sentence. However, it likely didn't help his case at all because his parole application was denied in 2006. Not only because of the carjacking and auto theft, but Norwegian laws had actually also changed. Previously, inmates could be released after serving 12 years of a 21-year sentence, but that was then updated to a mandatory sentence of 14 years. And honestly, from what a lot of sources say, that decision was actually largely made as a result of Varg carjacking and going out and about and escaping. They had already begun to discuss it before that happened, and then after that happened, everybody was like, yup. In 2007, he met a French woman named Marie Cachet, and they got married, and she quickly became pregnant. Remember, conjugal visits and daily passes, so he could come and go from the prison. Still, even after he escaped. And if you held on to hope that Marie Cachet would put him on the straight and narrow path, inspire him to do better, you'd be wrong. She is just as hateful and anti-Semitic as Varg is. They are quite literally 2 peas from the same pod, with the exception that she's French and doesn't have that whole Norwegian heritage, I have Viking blood type of spiel that Varg does. In March of 2009, his parole was announced. And then finally, on May 22nd, 2009, he made a statement that he had been privately released back into society and was no longer in prison. After that, he and Marie lived in Norway for a little bit before buying a small farm in the French wilderness, and that's where they've largely been living off the grid. Varg had a pretty popular YouTube channel where he would both preach his racist, xenophobic, and nationalistic bullshit, but also, he would also show himself playing dress up putting on like medieval armor and playing with his kids. It was actually at times fairly sweet. He would also give tips on sustainable agriculture and farming and, how they lived so far in the wilderness. Sometimes he would just do really weird skits. A lot of, and I don't know why this is, but there's something, I don't know if it's something in the water, if it's something that's just primal and ancestral inside of like 45-year-old and up men, where they feel like they have to preach at you from their car. If you're on TikTok or Instagram, you guys know what I'm talking about. It's typically the more like alt-right type of men who get in their pickup trucks and think they're making really powerful statements against like, gays, women, abortion, trans people, people of color, whatever. But Varg did the same. There are a bunch of videos of him sitting in his truck, just videotaping him going on these long little tangents and whatnot. It was just such a bizarre thing. And I mean, really only the Burzum people, like fan base, really watched him do this. But a lot of people like myself that just loves mess and just wants to see this crazy man, this crazy unhinged man, his, ramblings, I'd watch it too. He started getting really into Germanic paganism and talking about that kind of stuff. So he actually created a website for his philosophy, and it's called the Thulian Perspective. It's up right now if you want to take a look at it. Again, it's not very nice, but it's Thulian, Thulean, perspective.com. And he actively blogs there still today. I mean, that's basically all he does have, because his YouTube channel and Twitter accounts were both suspended for hate speech and going against terms and conditions. In 2011, he did an interview with Robin of Terrorizer magazine. This was the December 2011 issue. And one of her questions, I'm going to go over two of her questions to him. The first one was, the whole prison experience must have left its mark. In what ways has it changed you? Varg responded, I'm sorry to disappoint you, Robin, but this is all water under the bridge. I spent some 16 years in prison, and I don't intend to spend my post-prison time talking about this or even thinking about this. Shit happens, deal with it, get over it, and move on. I'll leave the self-pitying, whining, and sobbing for the chosen people at their wailing wall. End quote. So even in just the generic interview, he still has to basically be like, murdered a dude, I don't feel bad, don't care, don't want to talk about it, and fuck the Jews. I mean, that's really what he pretty much did. Obviously, an anti-Semitic comment. Second question was, of course you killed Euronymous in 1993. 18 years on, how do you feel about that act? Varg replied, I don't spend time thinking, let alone feeling, anything about this. Some die sooner than others, for different reasons. Many die just 2 months old because some pharmacists and bankers want to make money on dangerous vaccines. Many die in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya only because filthy rich bankers want to earn more money. Many die because normal human beings don't always understand the dangers of driving their cars. Many die because they make death threats against others. Arson belonged to that group, and he threatened a person who didn't give a shit at the time. Big mistake. To me, it meant, amongst other things, that I found the opportunity to do proper research on our ancient religion, a subject that many find interesting. Had I been, quote-unquote, free, I would probably not have given priority to such research. So rejoice. So as you can tell, he just has no cares to give in the world for anything he experienced. He learned nothing. He didn't care. And instead, he was like, you know what? Prison allowed me to do me. It allowed me to write my books and study my heritage. So rejoice. Rejoice in the fact that I killed a man. All was relatively quiet on the Varg front until 2013, when news broke that both Varg and his wife Marie had been arrested by French terror police, also known as DCRI. They claimed that they believed Varg had been planning a, quote, major terrorist act after Marie had been flagged buying 4 automatic rifles. Now, it is very important to note that Marie did have licenses for these guns. They were licensed. She wasn't trying to secretively buy them. She had licenses for all of the rifles. But you see, Varg had been heavily watched by French police anyway. You know, he was a well-known figure, he was a member of a neo-Nazi movement, but possibly most of all because he was loosely linked to Anders Breivik. If y'all recall, Anders Breivik was the very far-right domestic Norwegian terrorist who killed 77 people in 2 attacks, mostly children, at a summer camp. It was the rival political ideology to his. They had on a little island, they had a summer camp for kids, not political based at all. It was just a fun summer camp. And he went with, of course, an AR-15 because they all are, and killed, I believe, upwards of like 60 children on that island. Absolutely heinous. It was one of the most heinous acts of domestic terrorism that the world has ever seen. Well, he was not only a fan of Varg's music via Burzum, but also of Varg's ideals. He loved Varg's Mall and read his blog. So Anders Breivik actually sent, personally, his 1,500-page manifesto to Varg before he went on this bloody rampage. And this fact immediately became important to police. Varg openly admitted that Breivik sent the manifesto and even wrote a whole blog post about it on Burzum's website. He ended up critiquing it pretty strongly, not, saying, wow, that's really awful and disgusting. Why do you think this way? People deserve respect. No. That is not at all what happened. It was pretty much like, this person is worse than this person. This race is worse than this race for these reasons. Remember, Varg is still not a good person. In any case, Varg was held in police custody for just 2 days for the terroristic issue. Police were unable to find any evidence whatsoever supporting their belief that there was going to be some sort of upcoming attack. Instead, officials said that Vikerness would be charged with 2 counts of incitement to racial hatred due to the content of some of his blog articles. And he was. On July 9th, 2014, Varg went on trial in a Paris courtroom. He ended up receiving an €8,000 fine, the equivalent of about $7,100 and also a 6-month suspended sentence. During the trial, he actually told the NBC, the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation, that French police had made the entire thing up, fabricated evidence against him because they were basically trying to save face that their big raid on him produced no evidence. And what's so ironic is that one of Varg's last blog posts before he was arrested for the terroristic threats was actually on the subject of hate crime activities in France, like about threats, about hate crime, about, right-wing crime, hate crimes as far as like neo-Nazis, harming people of color. And here's what he had to say about that. What did Uncle Varg and all of his divine wisdom have to say about the increase in domestic terrorism and hate crimes? He said, quote, "Dear readers, when you read or hear about nationalist extremists or Nazis attacking others, when you hear about hate crime, when you hear about the terror and hatred of right-wing extremists, this is what you actually see. Lies, lies, and more lies. They are the extremists. They are the ones attacking us. They are the ones hating, and they hate Europe. They are the ones we should all fear. They are the ones using terror and lies to achieve their goals. The left-wing extremists make up a small part of our people, and they rule via harassment, terror, lies, and threats, and the peoples of Europe will at some point revolt against their reign. But until then, make sure you don't break any laws or do other things that can be used against us. The peoples of Europe are waking up to reality, and our mission is to do our best to help them wake up." And he did, by getting arrested and then being charged with hate speech. In 2015, Varg decided to release his own tabletop RPG, a la Dungeons and Dragons, because how else are you going to plant the seed of your batshit beliefs and try to influence others? Apparently, Varg was a huge tabletop fan as well. And of course, it follows a Norse-centric hero. And I'm just going to quote these 2 passages from an article on metalsucks.com by Jeff Truppel, who is the poor bastard who actually reviewed the game. And if you have any guesses about the type of content in this tabletop game, imagine Dungeons and Dragons, the tabletop, roll the die, that kind of thing, and what an anti-Semite and racist may feel about that. You're probably pretty spot on. Jeff Truppel said, quote, "Don't worry though, people of Middle Eastern and African descent are represented. They are the filthy, vulgar, poorly educated, animalistic coppermen. You can't play them, they are just intended to be cannon fodder. There are 2 varieties of coppermen, the weaklings and the darklings. I'm pretty sure that the weaklings are supposed to be Semitic people, as they receive a bonus to trickery. The darklings, meanwhile, receive a bonus to spear throwing. You can guess who they're supposed to represent." So yeah, you can get angry at how racist, sexist, and fascist this is. On the other hand, it's pretty sad just how his version of bigotry turns out to be. It's like looking at footage of a minstrel show. It's out of date and out of touch with reality, just like Varg himself. As long as he doesn't kill anyone, in parentheses, else, he's welcome to live in his little fantasy land where primitive people have perfect teeth, sneaky Jews trying to pollute his pure heathen bloodline, and some esoteric notion of honor is more important than compassion or love or any of the things that make life satisfying. He's a pathetic man who made a bad game and will probably blame his failure on the Zionist conspiracy or something. Which, such a great review of a board game, and I laughed so hard. Metalsucks.com, for those of you who don't know, is kind of like Metal Injection, Metalsucks.com. It's basically just metal-geared websites that cover all of the news out of it. And let's just say that none of them like Varg Vikerness. None of them. Not a single one. And in case you're wondering, because I know I wasn't, Varg Vikerness also made a post about Donald Trump becoming the 45th president of the United States. Immediately going to his Thulian Perspective website, he blogged that it was a massive victory for white people. He also wrote that it was the people waking up against the mainstream media, which, of course, is, according to him, quote, so full of shit and anti-European. Mainstream media supports the white genocide 100%. He followed this up by saying, quote, wake up to a day of light after years of pitch black darkness. You can't be white anymore. You can't have a straight nose. You have to be a lesbian, Latino, black, or at least have one in your family or family picture. These people are fucking sick. And multiple times he produced videos talking about Trump's immigration policy and cheering him on as well as a hero for the white race. So you can count Varg Vikerness as a Trump fan. That being said, though, surprisingly, he is very much actively pro-choice when it comes to abortion, which not what I expected when I read that. I was kind of a bit shocked. After Roe versus Wade was overturned in the US, he wrote, quote, support a woman's right to take an abortion. If you don't, you're going against nature. And the first comment on this article, I laughed so hard. Guys, I quite literally spit my drink all over my keyboard. It was someone who said, yay, we did it. We fixed him. I was hollering. I mean, with someone as gross and awful as Varg Vikerness is, that comment brought me such joy because I just read it and yay, we did it. We fixed him. And it brought me such joy. And lastly, as of last year, like where we are about right now, all we know is that Varg continues to spew racist bullshittery all over the internet. He has 7 children now. His wife gave birth, I believe, last year, and he still lives on a farm in the French countryside. He self-publishes books to his tabletop game. You can find them on Amazon for like $65 a pop. And he keeps putting out albums. Since he left prison, he has released 7 full-length albums. Again, 7 full-length albums. And I'm not one to judge people on their musical taste. I mean, not gonna lie, I kind of am. But like, you know, every so often when I go to a metal show or something, I'll see someone wearing a Burzum t-shirt. And it just elicits just this feeling of judgment. Do any of you watch Twin Peaks? You know, the log lady? I'm sitting there with like my log of judgment. How can you listen to someone, and this goes back to, you know, the other episodes as well, is are you able to separate the musician from the music, the director from their films, of people who have committed heinous crimes? But yeah, I just don't get it. Burzum still enjoys a good deal of popularity now, and he is just living a life apparently out in the middle of nowhere with his 4,000 children and his anti-Semitic wife, and teaching his children horrible, horrible racial stereotypes via a wannabe Dungeons & Dragons tabletop game. But that ties up the Varg, Mayhem, Euronymous, the Black Norwegian death metal. The runner-up case that I was also going to cover, this is an honorable mention here, is Gorgoroth, which is considered one of the most evil, satanic Norwegian black metal bands. And I mean, like, they're pretty, if you look at them on YouTube, look up Gorgoroth, which is Gorgoroth. You know, same thing, corpse paint, upside down crosses, very, 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 very satanic in nature. Like, they are considered one of the most satanic bands. So their lead singer's name is Gall. Now, back in 2001, he apparently had a man and then tortured him. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison without the possibility of parole back then. He apparently assaulted the victim for hours and tortured him. He was actually ordered to pay $25,000 in punitive damages, and then he spent a year in prison. The court wrote in that decision that his use of violence was extremely raw and brutal, and that there was no clear motive for the assault. In most cases, Gall's actions in the 2001 assault would have carried just a sentence of 90 days in prison. But because he actually tortured this man horrifically, he was sentenced to the full 1 year behind bars, as well as a $25,000 fine. Well, apparently, this happened again in 2005, where he supposedly, at an after party, got into an altercation. He was 29 years old at the time. He got into an altercation with a 41-year-old man. The 41-year-old man says that he went to Gall's house. They were supposed to go together to an after party. The man, the victim, says that he doesn't know what happened. He was sitting in a chair. He got into a verbal altercation and then was hit on the back of the head. He claims that Gall had a goblet, he describes it as the cup that you throw dye out of when you play tabletop games and things like that, and that Gall told him to bleed into the cup. He did, because he was bleeding so heavily from his head, and then Gall was threatening to drink his blood. Gall, of course, basically said, I don't know what happened. I didn't hit him. I didn't assault him. I didn't torture him. I have no idea how he was so severely assaulted. And, quote, anything I would say would just be pure speculation on my part. I don't know what happened. He says that he gave him the goblet so that he wouldn't bleed on the floor, that he has no idea where he got that he was going to, threatening to drink his blood. Apparently, the court actually agreed with the victim in this case, again, because Gall has done that before, and he was sentenced to 1 year and 2 months in jail. Originally, he was sentenced to 18 months. However, his fee was increased to $30,000, and then his sentence was lessened from 18 down to 14 months. And another interesting just side note here, too, because, bringing it full circle to the other topics that I've covered on the podcast. Interestingly enough, Gall now is 47 years old himself, and he is an incredible painter, incredible artist. If you want to look up some really, really cool paintings, look up Gall, Gaall. Absolutely despise and hate his music. And he's probably a pretty shitty person too. However, he actually came out as gay. And I find that incredibly fascinating, because for a genre of music that on the surface that is known to be so horribly homophobic, transphobic, racist, so on and so forth, Gall actually came out as gay. And the very first person he says that he told was his friend Faust. If you remember from the previous episode, and I discussed earlier tonight too, Faust is the one who killed the gay man who hit on him. And I think a lot of people speculated that Faust intentionally killed a gay man out of homophobia. Faust says that was not the case, that he's not homophobic, and that he just wanted to kill someone. Not like that makes it any better, right? Not like that actively makes it less horrible or horrific. But apparently, Gall told Faust first. So that's just, if you're in the metal scene, you kind of know the stories of all of these people. It's just a little extra ironic. But that ties up our Norwegian black metal, guys. Thank you for listening. Again, highly recommend the movie Lords of Chaos and the documentary series Until the Light Takes Us. Just fascinating coverage on a topic that doesn't really get enough press, I feel. It's just a really interesting moment in music history and life history, really, like pop culture history, that I find pretty fascinating. Personally, I love nothing more than logging onto YouTube and just finding really random documentaries. This last week, one of the best documentaries, and if you haven't watched it, one of the best documentaries I have ever seen. It's a Vice documentary. They released it in 2012. It's called The Cannibal Warlords of Liberia. Absolutely, hands down, one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. To this day, I believe that this is the best documentary that Vice has put out. But I digress. So you have the Cannibal Warlords of Liberia. They have a really new, interesting one about pink cocaine that's coming out of South America. That's actually starting to be a pretty big deal. I mean, I love sitting down and just watching different documentaries on walks of life and areas that I just never in a million years would experience or typically watch, right? But yeah, I love that. And I find that the Norwegian black metal also is kind of the same thing. It's a look, it's a view into a subculture that I just could not be further connected to. But that is all for today. Again, we're going to have probably 2 more news episodes this week. There's just simply too much to talk about. Also, that Jeffrey Dahmer series, guys, on Netflix. I know a lot of us are talking about it. A lot of us are watching it. I'm on episode 6 out of 10 myself. I have very mixed feelings to it, especially considering a couple of family members came out against it. They, in case you weren't aware, they were not contacted. Evan Peters of American Horror Story fame plays Dahmer. And this is when we get into the ethics of true crime, right? I mean, on one hand, it's kind of like it's Jeffrey Dahmer. Thousands of documentaries have been made about him. He is just one of the most controversial murderers in world history. Because he's so famous, because his crimes were so heinous, you also have to look on the other side of the victims. How would you feel if your loved one was murdered and cannibalized by someone who then gained a lot of notoriety and fame? If you guys, I don't know if you guys recall Sam Hain, the artist, did a comic book series. He does a lot of killers, but he did a whole series on Jeffrey Dahmer. It's part of the ethics of having a true crime podcast too. Do I feel kind of dirty watching this and then talking about it? Yeah, I do. A little bit. But one thing that I'm very, 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 very thankful for, and I did make this post on Instagram as well, is that I do think that the show, for all of its wrongs it shouldn't really have been made to begin with, but for all of its wrongs, I'm very thankful that at least it pointed out the fact that the reason why Jeffrey Dahmer was allowed to kill for so long was due to racial bias and injustice. And that's a conversation for the next episode. We'll get into that on the full review of this miniseries. But yeah, I definitely want to know your thoughts. Shoot them over to info@wesawthedevil.com, and I will read a couple of your reviews on the next episode as we talk about it. So info@wesawthedevil.com, and send in your thoughts on on how you think the miniseries is, and I will read them on the next episode. Thanks for listening, guys. Until next crime.